Welcome to chapter 4 of the book of First Nephi. The question that comes along with this chapter is an interesting one because it is, can God contradict himself? That is the question we're going to discuss more today in this chapter. We're going to see an interesting story of what it seems to be God in contradiction. So let's jump in and get started with this. Verse 1, And it came to pass that I spake unto my brethren, saying, Let us go up again unto Jerusalem, and let us be faithful in keeping the commandments of the Lord, for behold, he is mightier than all the earth. Then why not mightier than Laban and his 50, yea, or even his tens of thousands? Now, let's just pause for a second here in Nephi's discourse. If you remember from the last chapter, there's this big debate Nephi and his brothers are having about Laban. They all realize Laban is a powerful man, and he not only commands 50, but could slay 50 men by himself. Which you got to admit, if you're going into a fight knowing this guy can take out 50 people and it's just one-on-one with him, you're not going to look at your odds as very favorable. And so they see Laban as a near impossible obstacle in their goal of obtaining these brass plates. Nephi, in this chapter, points out, while Laban is a pretty powerful guy, let's move this to the level of God. That what is Laban compared to God? And if we follow God's will, then we have God on our side, which means is Laban really worth much? If he's standing in the way of God, then God's going to take care of him, basically. So now he's changing that comparison. So instead of saying, here's us and Laban's way better than us, Nephi is going, okay, but let's look up here where God is and see, Laban might be able to command 50 people and slay 50 people, but God created the earth. He can kind of do what he wants. It's powerful. He's a powerful guy. Verse 2, Therefore, let us go up, let us be strong like unto Moses. For he truly spake unto the waters of the Red Sea, and they divided hither and thither. And our fathers came through out of captivity on dry ground, and the armies of Pharaoh did follow and were drowned in the waters of the Red Sea. So there is a logical explanation that Nephi is bringing. He's trying to say, look, God can do anything. In fact, if you remember just a few thousand years ago, so this is kind of interesting to think about because Nephi is around 600-ish BC. Moses would have been, about I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Moses would have been like 2000-ish BC time frame, maybe a little later than that. So it'd be like us going, let's relate something from early first century period, like Jesus's time frame, a miracle that happened during Jesus's day, and relate that to how he could help us in our day. That's kind of a similar distance in time. So they're a lot closer to those events and have more original documents than we do today. But that's that same analogy that he's giving is, look, God took care of the people, our ancient ancestors. They took care of them. Why won't he help us? So verse 3, Now behold, ye know that this is true, and ye also know that an angel has spoken unto you. Wherefore can ye doubt? Let us go up. The Lord is able to deliver us even as our fathers, and to destroy Laban even as the Egyptians. So Nephi is equating, he's putting these components in. We are the people of Israel. Laban is the Egyptians. God is God, and he's going to help his people out in miraculous ways. He's not presupposing how God's going to do this, but he's believing that God will help them in doing this. And he's saying that, we just got to get some plates from this guy. This reminds me of those, the memes that we saw during COVID of, when our grandparents were kids, they were asked to defend their nation by going and serving in a war. Whereas we've been asked to defend our nation by staying home and not talking to anybody. So it's just kind of funny, that comparison of, they were asked to do hard things. Well, what we're being asked to do isn't as hard as what they had to do. And so Nephi's like, look, if he can help Moses and the people, the children of Israel, do this a phenomenal thing, why can't he help us get these plates from Laban? So now Nephi has changed the perspective to bring it right down to make it very possible that this could work. And he even said, you guys just saw an angel. I mean, what more proof you need that there is a God? Then an angel appeared. Come on, let's put our faith in God, and he'll help us figure this out. So verse 4, now when I had spoken these words, they were yet wroth, and did still continue to murmur. Nevertheless, they did follow me up until we came without the walls of Jerusalem. So they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's some justification. I can see, Nephi's got some logic here that they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, Moses did get out, God helped them, and yes, we did see an angel, so okay, well, maybe something will work out. So they're moving, they've left the cave, and they've gone to the walls of Jerusalem. So they're just outside those walls. And so they've at least come that far with him, basically. Verse 5, and it was by night, and I caused that they should hide themselves without the walls. And after they had hid themselves, I, Nephi, crept into the city and went forth towards the house of Laban. So there's probably, as they're walking, like, well, but I don't know, how's this going to work? I'm sure especially for Laman and Lemuel, they're starting to get into that logic pattern of, well, how do I know this is going to work? They're trying to think of logically, how would this fit? How can we fit God into this logic of our own mind? And which is convincing them it's not going to work. And so Nephi's probably like, fine, you guys go hide outside the city walls. I'll go in. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll just go in and do this. And so that's where we're at. An interesting comment I had here says, as you read Nephi's account of this encounter with Laban, remember again his words in 1 Nephi chapter 3. So if you remember last chapter, I will go and do things the Lord commanded, for I know he doesn't give a commandment to men unless he has a way to fulfill them. So he already established the logic in his mind before they left for this journey of how to think through this. And so he's already done that in his mind. And so he's just going, well, yeah, I said that. I got to back it up. This is how I back it up. By walking into the city, not knowing what is going to happen. So he says, you can see that these words were not an idle boast, and that Nephi really meant what he said. We also learn that while the Lord shall prepare a way for the obedient servant to keep his commandments, the way might not be an easy one. So when we think of putting this into our day and age, as you continue your study of the Book of Mormon, watch for evidence of the importance of the brass plates in the subsequent history of the Nephites. So this is something that's important to look at, is these plates are vitally important. So we're going to see this show up a lot as we go through the rest of the Book of Mormon. And so watch for those times when the brass plates are brought up and how people in later generations react to having those plates, and so glad that they are there. Especially when we get into Mosiah with the Mulekites. They're tickled pink that there is a record of their people that they have access to, because they didn't bring any records with them when they left Jerusalem. So that's later on down the road. But just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this, that how important these plates are. So verse 6, okay, this is Nephi now giving us a little bit of insight into what's going on with him. And I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. He's just going in. Pure faith. Okay, Laban's in the city. I need to go in the city. So I'm going to go into the city. Now what? Well, I've got to go over here, Laban's house over this way. So he's just trying to let the Spirit help him to go here, go there. So in his mind, there's probably a discussion of, okay, God, now what? Now where do I go? What do you want me to do? How do you want this to work? And how can he stay focused and centered so that he can hear the Spirit and be guided by him? Elder John H. Groberg of the 70 gave a challenge basically in a talk once that kind of goes along with what Nephi is going through. He said here, be willing to take reasonable risks. We live in an age of reason, logic, facts, and figures. These can be useful if kept in subjection to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. But if they ever take precedence over faith in Him, then they are not useful and can be very harmful. I have found in my life that most of the good decisions I have made may not have been made if they were based solely on logic or reason. Nephi was determined to do what God wanted him to do, even with logic to the contrary. The scriptures tell us in 1 Nephi 4:6 that he went forth not knowing beforehand what he should do, but knowing that he should obey God and get the plates. I suspect had he listened only to reason, Nephi and his brethren would still be waiting outside the walls of Jerusalem. I sometimes wonder if by our listening to reason and logic too much and not trusting God enough, we may find ourselves waiting outside the walls of his holy city. That was a CES fireside he did in 1994. And I think he makes some good points in there. That even though Nephi knows, I have no idea what to do with Laban. He's obviously a powerful man. He can command a lot of people. We've tried twice and almost died both times. The logic is going in favor of this is impossible and can't be done. But Nephi's putting his faith first. He's saying, I'm willing to go and do what God has asked us to do. God asked us to do this about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago, but it's still in a force. We're still in effect. So he has asked us to do something, and he's not going to give us something to do unless he provides a way that we can accomplish it. We don't know what way that is. We don't know what that means because God wants us to build faith in him. So he doesn't tell us the whole thing. It'd be interesting to see this story from that standpoint of what if God told Lehi, okay, Lehi, here's what you're going to do. You're going to send your kids back. They're going to go into the city. I need them the first couple attempts are going to be failures. And then we need to exercise their faith. And then they're going to go here on this day and do this and run into Laban. And here's what's going to happen and how it's going to work. And then you're going to put on his clothes and go over here and get these plates and bring his servant with you. And it would have been so interesting to think about this. What would have happened if God literally just laid the whole thing out and just told them the whole story? When you get to Jerusalem on this day, this time, you're going to meet Laban in this area. He's going to be drunk. You're going to be able to take him out, and then you put on his clothes, and then you go over here. I mean, if you just laid it out for him, it would have gone easier. If you think about it from like Nephi and his brothers, it would have been way easier for them, for God to just give them all the answers. But the problem is where would the faith come in? If the point of the gospel is to help us build our faith, then the point of the experiences we have is to cause us to have to answer those questions about our faith. Are we willing to follow God? Or are we not willing to follow God? That's the ultimate question. If you've gone through our Old Testament videos, especially like Isaiah and Revelations and those other ones, you realize that is such a common theme through the whole Bible. You've got a choice to make. You can follow God or you cannot follow God. What choice are you going to make? Everything that happens in life is about answering that. That's why Abraham 3:25 is so important for us to always remember that it is the purpose of this life is to see if we will keep the commandments of God. How far are we willing to go in keeping those commandments? That's the challenge. And so that's what they're faced with. And I believe this is the very reason why God didn't tell Lehi to get the plates while they were in Jerusalem. And if you think about it, I mean, that would have made so much more sense. Oh yeah, by the way, you're going to need these plates. God knew that Lehi and his family and his descendants are going to need these plates. God knew that. And he probably knew it when he told Lehi to leave Jerusalem. But he didn't tell Lehi, or at least we don't have any records of him telling Lehi, hey, by the way, you need to stop by Laban's place and get these plates and take them with you. He didn't. God didn't inform Lehi. As far as the record, I'm making the assumption that we're using what's in the Book of Mormon as our credible source, okay? And in here, it does not say that God told him to get those and Lehi forgot. It doesn't say that. It says that God told them to leave, they left, and then God told them to go back and get the plates. So it's not about the efficiency. It's not about the They thought they knew what God was telling them to do. And then God told them something different. Oh no, you need to go back and get these plates. What? I thought they're going to be destroyed. Well, yeah, you're not going to live there, but you got to go back and get something. Oh, okay. There's an illogical sense to that. If those plates are that important, why didn't he tell us in the first place to pick them up? Well, we were in Jerusalem. That would have made more sense, been more logical. This is the point of this story that Nephi is telling us in here, is this is about experiences in our life are about testing our faith, not proving God can be logical. That's what it comes down to. That's why we don't have the gold plates. That's why the LDS Church doesn't have any of the actual scriptures of the Book of Mormon, because it's not about proving the Book of Mormon right or true. It's about proving our willingness to follow the will of God by asking God about the plates, the Book of Mormon, basically. That's what this is about, testing their faith. Now, Sam and Laman and Lemuel, they reached a point where their faith was maxing, their ability to exercise their faith was hitting a mark, and they're like, I don't know if I can do any more than this. And they stopped. Nephi said, I believe I can go do more. We haven't exercised fully using God and our faith. So Nephi is going to do that right now. So realize this is important. I think this is the ultimate question we have in our life, is how far are we willing to go? How much faith are we willing to put in God? Do we reach? Most of us have a tendency to reach a certain point and then we plateau. We don't want to exercise any more faith than this. We don't want to go any further. I would argue that the difference between an average person and a prophet is a prophet was willing to go a lot further in exercising their faith. That's that whole story of many are called but few are chosen. We're all growing, we're all exercising faith, but we stopped and the prophet didn't. And that's why they rose to a level where God could then do more with them and help them more, because they were willing to exercise and push their faith. Not any different than pushing yourself at the gym or reading and studying deeper and more books or things like that. Pushing yourself. We need to push our faith. That's where we need to go. Would we stay outside the walls, or would we have the faith to go into the city of Jerusalem? So anytime you have a faith challenge, this is an important thing to think about, okay? So here's the other thing I want to bring up with this story here before we continue on. These sons of Lehi are dealing with a faith crisis. Their faith is being pushed and challenged and tested. Even Nephi, even though he was willing to go into the city and willing to do these things, he still is going to have his faith tested, and even more as we get into the rest of the story. A faith crisis is not a bad thing. I want to start getting that thought in your mind now, because we're going to see this theme come up a ton through the rest of the Book of Mormon. A faith crisis, a challenge of your faith, isn't a bad thing by itself. You have to have your faith tested in order for it to grow. The question comes down to, are you willing to exercise faith in God? Or are you going to double down on what you currently believe? That's the main issue. We're going to see this through the rest of the Book of Mormon, so I want you to pay attention to that. But let's jump in. Let's get back into the story of Nephi and get into this more. So verse 7, nevertheless, I went forth, and as I came near unto the house of Laban, so he's in the city, the Spirit's telling him, go to the house of Laban. As I came near unto the house of Laban, I beheld a man, and he had fallen to the earth before me, for he was drunken with wine. So Nephi is probably, the Spirit's like, okay, Nephi, you need to go in the city. Okay, it makes sense. Now I'm in the city, now what? Okay, Nephi, you need to go to the house of Laban. Head to the house of Laban. So Nephi is probably going, okay, we're going to the house of Laban. If I'm thinking critically about this or trying to think logic about this, what does that mean? How do we get there? What am I going to face when I get to Laban? Is he just going to open the doors? Do I got to sneak into his house to get these records? So I got to get the keys out of his cloak pocket or something to get the records? What am I going to do? I'm sure he's got a million possibilities running through his mind, but he's trying to stay focused on following the Spirit. And that's important for us to think about. When we have all those logics, like there's so many things that could go wrong or could be happening or different possibilities, let me center myself and focus on the Spirit. What's the Spirit saying? Spirit, again, isn't telling Nephi the whole plan. He's giving him the next step. That's it. I'm in the city. What's the next step? You need to head towards the house of Laban. Okay. Again, Nephi's probably thinking about, what am I going to do in the house of Laban? Do I have to fight Laban? Am I going to have to sneak around? Do I have to break into his house to steal keys to get into the treasury? You know, is the plates in his house? Are they not? So he's probably focusing on the house and what he's going to do there. On his way there, he runs into this drunken man. And now verse 8. And when I came to him, I found that it was Laban. So now here's a whole paradigm shift. Oh my gosh, I'm not even having to go to the house. Laban is right here in front of me, and he's passed out. So now what do I do? Verse 9. And I beheld his sword, and I drew it forth from the sheath thereof. And the hilt thereof was of pure gold, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. And I saw the blade thereof was of the most precious steel. Now this is an interesting thing, okay? He's telling us this story of following the Spirit to find to get these plates. And the Spirit probably said, oh look, there's a sword, draw it. So he draws it out. And now Nephi is like enamored by the sword. He just spent a whole paragraph telling us of how beautiful this amazing this sword was. Is that really relevant to the story of what we're doing? No, it's not. In fact, Nephi and the other people complain often in the Book of Mormon that it's hard to write their records down because it takes so long for them to put it into the metal plates to do it. But yet he just spent a paragraph telling us how amazing this sword was. Do you think Nephi is trying to stay focused but getting distracted? Yeah, I think so. That's the same as any of us. We're going to get distracted by logic while we're trying to follow the Spirit of God. God's logic doesn't follow man's logic. It's a different equation, different way of thinking. So now there is a challenge that sometimes comes up. So let's pause this story for just a second here. Some people complain about this verse because they look at this and go, steel. Now steel isn't, you don't just find a bunch of rocks, oh look, there's steel, let's melt it down and turn it into a sword. Steel is an amalgamation of other metals put together. So you take several different other metals, iron and copper and other things like brass is iron and copper together. You combine metals to create steel. So this is a manufactured metal. A lot of people use this as a way to push back against the Book of Mormon, saying, "Oh, they can't have steel. This is the Iron Age. Why would they have steel back then?" Well, let's talk about this. Hugh Nibley brings this up in one of his books. He said the Egyptians had been making steel since 1200 BC, according to J.R. Forbes' book, The Coming of Iron, in 1944. Gerald Wainwright's book, also in The Coming of Iron in Antiquities, 1936. Max Ebert in Berlin wrote a book, and the front piece of the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology in 1942. All of those are resources that show steel was manufactured in Egypt as even up to 1200 BC, which puts it closer to the time of David and Solomon of having steel being made in Egypt. So there's plenty of proof that steel was around, even though we call this the Iron Age. It was the age where iron was the most popular type of artifact that they find with metal. So when you hear those terms, the Iron Age, what it is a lot of scientists had discovered, hey, suddenly a lot of iron gets used in metals for different things, for like swords and for bowls and other things like that. And then suddenly there's a Bronze Age, because iron is an actual metal you can find. You can find it in rocks, iron ore, melt it down and make it. It doesn't need to be mixed. Whereas like bronze, which is brass, basically, that is copper and iron mixed, if I remember right. So the Bronze Age is a later age. So They take this iron and realize, oh, we can give it some good, strong strength, but make it lighter if we mix it together, mix the copper together with the iron. So we get a better amalgam, but now that's a manufactured metal. So we had to understand the manufacturing of that before we could have it in wide use. So the Bronze Age, they see a replacement of iron. They don't use as much iron, or as they start to use more bronze. So they refine it and manufacture it, then they start to use it. That's why those periods of history are called the way they are, because there is an abundance of use of those metals. We have to realize, though, that just because there's an abundant use of those metals doesn't mean it precludes the use of anything else. And according to these scholars, steel was used for a long time in Egypt. And if Lehi's trading with people in Egypt, he's coming in contact with this metal and these opportunities. And if Egypt is a close trading partner with Palestine, with the Jerusalem area, then they would have trade and connections. That's, you have steel, we like this, let's bring it up here. Even though for the whole area, bronze was predominantly used, or iron, doesn't preclude that there was nothing else there. So when you think of the Iron Age, it doesn't mean everything was made out of iron and nothing else was used. That would be an oversimplification. It just means that there was an abundance of use of iron, but it doesn't mean there wasn't other ones there. We could look at it. We could look at the idea of, a series of cars. Oh, just because a certain model of car comes out and everybody seems to want to buy it, doesn't mean there's no more other cars out there. We have newer cars today. When the Hummer started to come out, it doesn't mean everybody got rid of their old cars to suddenly join the crowd and get Hummers. Or just because now we have electric cars doesn't mean all the gas guzzling cars are gone. So we have to realize that history isn't black and white. It doesn't just go from one to the next like a black and white transition. There's gray. There's a lot of other things that are going on in there as well. History is a lot messier than we think. It's not as clean as we think it is when we read about it. So anyways, let's jump on to this story. Okay, so Nephi is now admiring this sword of Laban. Verse 10, and it came to pass that I was constrained by the Spirit that I should kill Laban. But I said in my heart, never at any time have I shed the blood of man. And I shrunk and would that I might not slay him. Now, if there is ever a definition of a faith crisis, that verse is it. Nephi has been told his whole life, thou shalt not kill. That's the law of Moses. That's punishable by death. If you kill somebody, you get killed. It's a bad thing. God does not want you to do it. There's tons and tons of examples of God telling people don't kill, this, following the law of Moses and things. That's what Lehi taught his family, and Nephi's grown up with that, and Nephi is trying to be faithful to God. And now God is telling him to do something that Nephi thought was a contradiction to current doctrine. This is a challenging moment in Nephi's life. This is probably one of the defining moments. He has several, but this is one of those defining moments in his life where his faith is pushed, even to the point of seeming like God is contradicting himself. God, you told me for millennia it's bad to kill, but yet you want me to kill this guy? What's going on here? So Nephi's pulling back, going, wait a minute here. What I currently believe is in contradiction to what you're telling me now. That's a faith crisis. If there ever was one, that is one. Verse 11, and the Spirit said unto me again. So again, he's still following the Spirit. He's still trying to stay in tune. So he's basically saying, what I'm understanding is contradictory, but I'm still trying to understand you, God. I'm still trying to apply my faith in you. And so here's what the Spirit tells him. Behold, the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands. Yea, and I also knew that he had sought to take away mine own life. So the Spirit tells him, God has put him here for you to do this. And Nephi's now doing some logic going, well, yeah, he actually tried to kill us twice before. He wouldn't listen to the commandments of God, so we're now putting him in a negative light. He took our property. He stole from us. That's capital punishment as well. So do you see Nephi is trying? There's logic going on in his mind. He's trying to understand and justify things and trying to make sense of what's happening around him. Verse 12, and it came to pass that the Spirit said unto me again, slay him, for the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands. Now that's the same message that he got in verse 10 and 11, but combined, basically. So that's a reiteration of it. Now, verse 13 is an important part of this story. Verse 13, this is the Spirit giving Nephi some understanding of the logic that God is bringing to this, okay? So in Nephi's mind, he knows there's what God has said. He knows there's what God is now asking him to do, and they seem in contradiction. So he's holding two contradictory ideas in his mind, trying to find the truth between the two of these. And this is where the Spirit helps him understand more of God's logic in this. He says, behold, the Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. So now Nephi is getting more of the logic of God. These are the doctrines and principles of why this is happening. So now Nephi can start to understand, oh, there is greater things at play here. Whenever two laws of physics come into contact with each other, the one that has the greater force with it wins. Okay? When two objects collide, the object that has the least amount of tensile strength will collapse first. The other one will move through it. That's how physics works. One law is always going to have a hierarchy over the other law for different reasons. But in that instance, when those laws come together, there's going to be a hierarchy, and the higher law will win. That's, in essence, from a scientific standpoint, that's basically what verse 13 is talking about. I understand it's bad to kill people. I understand it's not a good thing to do. However, sometimes people make choices that put them in direct contradiction to the will of God. And when they choose to do that, then God sometimes will make a different choice because of their choice. Now, this doesn't mean Laban is gone forever. It means he moves him to the next world, spirit world. And we know from Latter-day Revelation that missionary work happens in the spirit world, so maybe Laban had a chance to accept the gospel. We don't know. You have to realize the eternal perspective is way further than just this life. We have to think about this life and the next life combined to get it all, to think through the plan of God more. So now Nephi understands more the logic that God is applying this, the principles that are at play in this. Verse 14, and now when I, Nephi, had heard these words, I remembered the words of the Lord, which he spake unto me in the wilderness, saying that inasmuch as thy seed shall keep my commandments, they shall prosper in the land of promise. Now here's what's interesting is we could see this going back to, we don't really have, for verse 14, a way of looking like where, we're only four chapters into this. Nephi doesn't give us a lot about his journeys in the wilderness, because he does here, this is something that God spoke to him in the wilderness. Was this spoken to him as they left Jerusalem, or was this spoken as they went back to Jerusalem? We don't know which journey this was spoken, but apparently God gave Nephi, because Nephi was paying attention to the Spirit, some help. Inasmuch as thy seed shall keep my commandments, they shall prosper in the land of promise. So that was something he learned ahead. Now he's remembering that. Okay, Laban is still passed out in front of him, and Nephi's still holding the cool sword. Verse 15, so think about this. We're getting the logic and the thinking in Nephi's mind. So time is kind of paused as we're going to examine what's going on in Nephi's brain. Because this all happens in probably like a second or two in his brain. But we're gonna have numerous verses to discuss what's going on in just a split second in his mind. Verse 15, yea, and I also thought that they could not keep the commandments of the Lord according to the law of Moses, save they should have the law. So even though God told Nephi, hey, just so you know, just a heads up, it's important that your descendants keep the law. And as long as they keep the law, they'll prosper. And he's like, oh, that's good. I want my family to prosper and do good. So that's good. And now he's going, but how can they prosper without the law? The law is on the plates. Therefore, we need the plates. Therefore, we fulfill what God has said. And this is a better outcome for the family. More people will live with God because they have the plates than just Laban in his life. So when you compare, do we help all these other people or do we save Laban's life? Laban's made his choices and he has not been found on the right side of it. And so he has, there's been other choices made. President Monson has a famous quote that he says often that goes along with this. And it says that when God speaks and man obeys, that man will always be right. So realize that God is a controlling factor in determining what is right. And when God speaks, that's right, even if it contradicts everything else we know. So some people might look at that and go, well, that's kind of a self-serving principle and idea, and it kind of looks that way. But it's God. How are you going to argue with that? I mean, he kind of controls all those cards. So, yeah, okay, maybe that's how it, we don't want to contradict him. So that's how it goes. We're going to follow him. Now, if we believe God is loving and true and faithful, then he will help us understand how it fits with the grander plan. And that's what Nephi is understanding here, basically. So it says in verse 15, yea, and I also thought that they could not keep the commandments of the Lord according to the law of Moses, save they should have the law. And I also knew that the law was engraven upon the plates of brass. And again, I knew that the Lord had delivered Laban into my hands for this cause, that I might obtain the records according to his commandments. So this is all this logic that's going through Nephi's mind as he is understanding, oh, yeah, we need the plates. This is important. This is doing it. Okay, so Laban's life is expendable at this point. He's made his choices, and God has decided your time is done. And that's where we're at. The Book of Mormon study guide made a comment about this. They said, the Lord wanted Lehi and his descendants to have the scriptural record, even if one man should perish. For it to happen, the brass plates blessed not only the Nephite and Mulekite nations, but they led to some of the written portions of the gold plates as well, such as Isaiah quotations, the allegory of Zenos. The Book of Mormon has blessed and will bless the lives of millions of people and nations. Ultimately, all this was at stake when Nephi stood over Laban and followed the voice of the Spirit. We can look from our perspective back and go, Nephi made a pretty good choice. In that moment, Nephi's still sweating the details of this. I mean, this is quite the heavy choice. Could you, if God asked you to say something that was contradictory, could you do it? Now, the challenge is how do you know if God gives you something that seems contradictory, how would you know if it comes from God? This is the important question that we always need to be asking. We need to verify it is of God first before we act on it. Make sure we are following God, doing the things of God that we know. We follow the light and wisdom we have now. And as we seek to have that Spirit close with us, to help us be in a position to have that Spirit influence us, that will help us to know, is this from God or is this not from God? That's the key to understanding a faith crisis. Having a faith crisis is something we should experience often if we are pushing our faith and trying to understand the truth and learn and be better. Sometimes that means we learn how the sausage is made isn't as pretty as we thought it was. But here's the point, in that moment, are we willing to open ourselves to follow God and seek that closeness to the Spirit? Or are we going to say, I'm going to choose what I believe and I'm going to double down on that? That's the thing we have to think about. That's the point that is important for us to be aware of and understand. So verse 18, we're going to hear now what Nephi made his choice up to be. Therefore I did obey the voice of the Spirit, and took Laban by the hair of the head, and I smote off his head with his own sword. Nephi followed what the Spirit said. Even though he's trying to use logic to justify and think through this and understand it, he still followed the Spirit and did it. Verse 19, and after I had smitten off his head with his own sword, I took the garments of Laban and put them upon mine own body, yea, even every whit, and I did gird on his armor about my loins. So he's putting on the armor and clothes of Laban, basically. So he looks like Laban. At verse 20, and after I had done this, I went forth unto the treasury of Laban, and as I went forth towards the treasury of Laban, behold, I saw the servant of Laban who had the keys of the treasury. Now realize, again, Nephi's still trying to follow Spirit. So kill him. Okay, now what? Put his clothes on. Okay, now what? Got his clothes on. Go to the treasury. Okay, I got to go to the treasury dressed as Laban. Now what? Oh, look, here's his servant. And I commanded him in the voice of Laban that he should go with me into the treasury. This is the guy that has the keys to the treasury. Hey, I need you to come with me. Verse 21, and he supposed me to be his master Laban, for he beheld the garments and also the sword girt about my loins. And he spake unto me concerning the elders of the Jews, he knowing that his master Laban had been out by night among them. And I spake unto him as if it had been Laban. So Nephi is fully assuming this persona of being Laban. And now the servant is now, his name is Zoram. We'll get his name here in a little bit. But he's from his perspective, he just sees Laban and goes, oh, Laban wants to go to the treasury. Okay, he's the boss. I will follow him. So he starts asking Laban about the elders of the Jews. Okay, so the elders of the Jews, this is getting into the idea of the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jewish community. So they're collaborating at night with the king, this local leader. Okay, now remember, Zedekiah is the king of all of Jerusalem. And so the elders are working with, this is religious people working with the governmental people. Now in our day and age, we think of these as separate because we have the concept of the separation of church and state. Back then, religion was the same as everyday life. So these are just religious leaders and governmental leaders, two sides of the same coin in their perspective, coming together to discuss things. Okay, so I want to read something that goes into this. Hugh Nibley talks about this a little bit in some of his books. He said, how did the elders of the Jews get such power over the king? It was not entirely Zedekiah's weakness that was to blame, for the real showdown had come in the days of Hezekiah, whose every attempt at reform had been systematically frustrated by the Sanhedrin. As in other ancient states of the time, including those of Greece and Rome, the king was traditionally a member of the old land-holding aristocracy, to whom he was obliged to defer on many points. He ruled by and with the consent and advice of a council whose nature and composition are still recalled in our own word, Senate, meaning council of elders. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lehi were themselves members of this ruling class. There is evidence, according to greats, that the Talmud is right in reporting that King Hezekiah actually married Isaiah's daughter after the Assyrian danger was over, and Winkler has shown how the king at Jerusalem sought the advice and counsel of Jeremiah as a wealthy and powerful man with important connections. Though they were mostly Babylonian connections, highly obnoxious to the ruling clique at Zedekiah's court. That clique had come into power in the days of Hezekiah, at which time the aristocrats possessed such an extensive power in the state of Judah that it almost surpassed that of the king. These aristocrats were a new upstart faction, however, and not that to which Lehi and the prophets belonged. The natural nobility that descended from the patriarchal conditions of old was, so to speak, pushed aside by an artificial nobility of courtiers. Under Hezekiah, that is, the old-fashioned elders of the first families were supplanted by the new crowd, composed of the younger sons of the kings and their families and appanage, along with the families of the favorites of former kings. But how do we know that Lehi was a member of the old aristocracy? His probable association with Jeremiah, his education, his noble ancestry that could be traced back to Joseph and related him to Laban himself. The fact that a family record had been kept from very ancient times on expensive bronze plates, his close and long-standing cultural ties with Egypt and Sidon, rather than Tyre, which was favored by the ruling group, the quantity and nature of his possessions, all tell the same story, but the key to the situation is to be found in the frequent mention by Nephi of the land of his inheritance, which was both the source of his wealth and the place where he kept it. The pronounced distaste with which Nephi so often refers to the Jews at Jerusalem as a group to which his own people definitely do not belong makes it apparent that he is speaking of the Jewish faction that controlled Jerusalem, both the government and the populace, and also implies that Lehi's family did not think of themselves as living in the city. They are apparently the old land aristocracy that did not go along with the crazy ways and policies of the new rulers. So this is that idea. The governmental organization changed, like Hugh Nibley talks about in the time of Hezekiah. Hezekiah tries to go back to the old ways of allowing the prophets and apostles and those have precedence and to work with the government and to do more. And the current aristocracy, which is about power and fame and wealth, said, no, we're not going to do that, and pushed Hezekiah out. And so they took over and they want to build this alliance with Egypt, and they get rid of the Babylonian people and things. These are all these groups. This is the things that are happening at this time, is the Jewish rulers, religious and governmental, want to create economic benefits for themselves by building an alliance with Egypt and getting rid of Babylon. They see Egypt as their savior, as their help to financial success, not Babylon. And so they're trying to organize themselves in a secret way to go against Babylon. And that's probably what Laban spent the night talking with them about, is some of these plans and ideas of figuring all these things out to come together. Verse 24, and I also spake unto him that I should carry the engravings which were upon the plates of brass to my elder brethren who were without the walls. And I also bade him that he should follow me. So Nephi is telling him, yes, I need to go talk to my brethren outside the walls. Verse 26, and he, supposing that I spake of the brethren of the church, and that I was truly that Laban whom I had slain, wherefore he did follow me. So now Zoram's thinking, oh, the church leaders, his brethren, are outside the city walls, and he's got to take the plates of brass to them for some reason. Okay, I'm not going to question my boss's logic here, but I'm just going to follow along and go with this. So in, let's see, this was Bruce R. McConkie, The Bible, a Sealed Book, in supplement, a symposium on the New Testament in 1984 said, was there a church anciently, and if so, how was it organized and regulated? There was not so much as the twinkling of an eye during the whole so-called pre-Christian era, when the Church of Jesus Christ was not upon the earth, organized basically in the same way it now is. Melchizedek belonged to the church, Laban was a member, so also was Lehi long before he left Jerusalem. There was always apostolic power. The Melchizedek priesthood always directed the course of the Aaronic priesthood. All these prophets held a position in the hierarchy of the day. There was a church. There was an organization, but there was a schism, because there was the main philosophy and ideas, and then there was like Jeremiah and his ideas. And Jeremiah's like, you guys, we've gone away from the truth. We need to come back to it. We've got problems and challenges. And they're like, no, we're fine. We're okay. We don't need to have things restored or put back in place. We're on the same path. We're doing fine. So not unlike the challenge between what Joseph Smith did and the rest of Christianity in a way, basically. So there is a church. They all, again, religion and daily life weren't separated like we think of today. It was, religion was life. You just did it. You just followed the religion. That was just your daily, day-to-day activities and things. And church was a part of that and other things too. So now they're heading with the plates outside the city. Verse 27, and he spake unto me many times concerning the elders of the Jews as I went forth unto my brethren who were without the walls. So this is, again, this idea of what's going on here. Now, Hugh Nibley brings up some interesting points about this, because obviously Zoram is really concerned about what's happening with the government and the church leaders talking. Hugh Nibley says, "We sense the gravity of the situation in Jerusalem, which the elders are still trying to conceal. We hear the suppressed excitement of Zoram's urgent talk as he and Nephi hasten through the streets to the city gates. And from Zoram's willingness to change sides and leave the city, we can be sure that he, as Laban's secretary, knew how badly things were going." We're going to see that in just a second here. From the Lachish letters, we talked about this last chapter, the Lachish letters, it is clear that informed parties in Jerusalem were quite aware of the critical state of things at Jerusalem, even while the Sarim, the elders, were working with all their might to suppress every sign of criticism and disaffection. How could they take counsel to provide for the defense of the city and their own interests without exciting alarm or giving rise to general rumors and misgivings? By holding their meetings in secret, of course, such midnight sessions of civil and military leaders as Laban had just been attending. So we talked about that, the Lachish letters last time. Lachish is a suburb of Jerusalem. That's where the wealthy class lived, and they were talking with the governmental class so to say, hey, we need to bond together and form an alliance with Egypt to get rid of Babylon out of us, because that's going to be in our financial best interests to do this, despite the misgivings and problems that's going to arise for the people. Jeremiah is teaching against all of that, contrary to that, which means we need to pose him as treason and get him kicked out. Basically, that's the problem. If you go read the book of Jeremiah, you can see all that play out. And now verse 28, there's going to be a bit of a problem that happens here. "And it came to pass that when Laman saw me, he was exceedingly frightened, and also Lemuel and Sam. And they fled from before my presence, for they supposed it was Laban, and that he had slain me and had sought to take away their lives also." So these guys are waiting. The three brothers Nephi are waiting outside. Suddenly, the doors open up. Here comes somebody dressed as Laban and Laban's servant next to him, carrying the plates. And they're like, "Oh, crap. Nephi's been killed. We're out of here." And so they start to flee. Verse 29, "And it came to pass that I called after them, and they did hear me, wherefore they did cease to flee from my presence." So he's like, "Guys, no, wait. It's me, Nephi. Wait." And they're like, "Wait, what? Nephi's wearing Laban's clothes? What? That's what?" So they're now having to get up to speed with what's going on here. And of course, Zoram is too, because Zoram's going, "Nephi, you say you're Nephi? Are you not Laban? Wait, why are you dressed as Laban? What's going on?" So there's all this confusion that's happening. Verse 30, "And it came to pass that when the servant of Laban beheld my brethren, he began to tremble and was about to flee from before me and return to the city of Jerusalem." So Zoram's like, something nefarious is going on. This is not the church people. This is apparently not Laban, but he's dressed in Laban's clothes. There's a conspiracy here. I got to get out of here. Verse 31, "And now I, Nephi, being a man large in stature, and also having received much strength of the Lord, therefore I did seize upon the servant of Laban and held him that he should not flee." So Nephi is pinning Zoram down. Nephi's probably a lot younger than Zoram and a lot stronger, and so he's able to keep, Zoram's as a secretary. Zoram spends most of his day writing parchments down and writing notes and doing things. Nephi's a young man. He's working. He is on the trade, so he's traveling and he's hunting and fishing and doing things. He's in much better shape. Verse 32, "And it came to pass that I spake with him, that if he would hearken unto my words, as the Lord liveth, and as I live, even so that if he would hearken unto our words, we would spare his life." Now that is an oath. They didn't have legal contracts quite the same way as we have today, where they should have a court and you can enforce it and things like that. But lying still was a problem back then, just as it is today. And so they made an oath. And usually you're going to swear against something that could be taken away from you. So swearing against your life means if this doesn't work out, you have the right to kill me. Nephi swore by his life and the Lord, which means if I break this covenant, I'm giving God permission to take me out, basically. God will now be justified in killing me if I don't keep my end of the bargain. So Zoram doesn't have to worry about it because God's going to handle the keeping this agreement, basically. So these are two of the strongest types of oaths that could be given. My own life and God's life, basically. Meaning, if I don't do it right, God has all opportunities to strike me down. Zoram doesn't have to worry about it. God will honor the agreement, basically, or deal with it. Verse 33, and I spake unto him even with an oath, that's as the Lord liveth and as I live, that he need not fear, that he should be a free man like unto us if he would go down in the wilderness with us. So now he's saying, look, we fled, we're out in the wilderness, we're free. We don't have the government over us. We don't have all the oppression and the problems and challenges. We're a free people. We can make our own choices now. Do you want to come with us? Type idea. We need you to come with us, because if Zoram goes back and tells the people, hey, there's a conspiracy, they've killed Laban, they're out wandering in the wilderness, guess what Jerusalem's army is going to do? Go out into the wilderness to find Lehi and his people and kill them and get rid of them. So this is a problem area. Shinyabi, in his book, An Approach to the Book of Mormon, talks about this a little bit, and he says, when Zoram saw the brethren, heard Nephi's real voice, he got the shock of his life, and in a panic made a break for the city. In such a situation, there was only one thing Nephi could possibly have done, both to spare Zoram and to avoid giving alarm. And no Westerner could have guessed what it was. Nephi, a powerful fellow, held the terrified Zoram in a vice-like grip long enough to swear a solemn oath in his ear, as the Lord liveth and as I live, that he would not harm him if he would listen. Zoram immediately relaxed, and Nephi swore another oath to him that he would be a free man if he would join the party. What astonishes the Western reader is the miraculous effect of Nephi's oath on Zoram, who upon hearing a few conventional words promptly becomes tractable. While as for the brothers, as soon as Zoram made an oath unto us that he would tarry with us from that time forth, our fears did cease concerning him. The reaction of both parties makes sense when one realizes that the oath is the one thing that is most sacred and inviolable among the desert people and their descendants. Hardly will an Arab break his oath, even if his life be in jeopardy, for there is nothing stronger and nothing more sacred than the oath among the nomads, and even the city Arabs, if it be exacted under special conditions. The taking of an oath is a holy thing with the Bedouins, says one authority. Woe to him who swears falsely. His social standing will be damaged and his reputation ruined. No one will receive his testimony, and he must also pay a money fine. But not every oath will do. To be most binding and solemn, an oath should be by the life of something, even if it be by a blade of grass. The only oath more awful than that, by my life, or less commonly, by the life of my head, is the Wa Hayat Allah, by the life of God, or as the Lord liveth, the exact Arabic equivalent of the ancient Hebrew Hay Elohim. So we see that the only way that Nephi could possibly have pacified the struggling Zoram in an instant was to utter the one oath that no man would dream of breaking, the most solemn of all oaths to the Semite, as the Lord liveth and as I live. So Nephi makes these oaths. Zoram now knows this is serious. If he's making these kinds of oaths, and it is so bad to break them. I mean, not only can God strike you down, but you lose your standing within your community and society. Like you're going to destroy your whole life if you break this oath. That helped Zoram know he can trust Nephi and understand this. So verse 34, and I also spake unto him, saying, surely the Lord hath commanded us to do this thing, and shall we not be diligent in keeping the commandments of the Lord? Therefore, if thou wilt go down into the wilderness to my father, thou shalt have place with us. So applying a bit of logic, God told us to do this. Otherwise, why would we have done this? I mean, why would I go in and kill Laban and do all this stuff if it wasn't God's will? And Zoram's probably like, yeah, that's a good point. You got to be totally insane to do this without having God behind you to do it. So maybe there's something to what Nephi and his family are doing. Verse 35, and it came to pass that Zoram did take courage at the words which I spake. Now Zoram was the name of the servant, and he promised that he would go down into the wilderness with unto our father. Yea, and he also made an oath unto us that he would tarry with us from that time forth. So now there's a Zoram's made an oath with Nephi and his brothers. So verse 36, now we were desirous that he should tarry with us for this cause, that the Jews might not know concerning our flight into the wilderness, lest they should pursue us and destroy us. So again, if Zoram goes back into Jerusalem, it's bad. There's going to be an army coming after Lehi and his family. Verse 37, and it came to pass that when Zoram had made an oath unto us, our fears did cease concerning him. And it came to pass that we took the plates of brass and the servant of Laban, and departed into the wilderness, and journeyed unto the tent of our father. So now they've moved into the wilderness. They've gone back that week, 10, 14, some odd day journey back to the wilderness to get back home with the brass plates. So next chapter, we're going to see more from Lehi's perspective and then bringing them back together, what is going on there, and the next part of the story. So we'll see you in the next chapter.